Right, it's another compelling case. It really is compelling. An elderly couple in pain who jumped to their deaths because they preferred such an end to such a life. It's terrible. It's made the front pages of the newspapers, the lead stories on TV and radio. Most people are putting on their mock angry faces to demand that we legalize euthanasia and the right to die. If they thought about this for a moment, they would maybe ask deeper, more important questions, such as why these two people were not receiving appropriate pain relief and personal attention. Where were their family members? Where were their friends and their neighbors who are now giving media interviews explaining how awful the whole thing is? Well, yeah, it is. It's terrible. It is terrible. But a terrible, tragic action does not a consistent, logical argument make. Look, I suppose I'm one of the lucky ones, and so far I haven't had to face these life and death challenges directly. I probably will at some point. But my mum, God bless her, she died from Alzheimer's, and I saw her wither away from a tough, loving, wonderful, independent woman to a broken shell, really. It was more difficult than I can ever say, but it was still her. It was still her. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it wasn't messy and nasty, but the idea of killing her was and is grotesque, evil. The thing is, nobody approaching death should experience pain, and nobody need do so. All physical pain, this is true, can be controlled, but insufficient time and money is spent training doctors and nurses to deal with end-of-life issues. When you should listen to the recently elected Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, I would say that the best political leader in the world right now.
I think we should be slow to think that our wisdom is so much deeper than that of every previous generation that now we want to offer euthanasia to people at the very time when we have more capacity to relieve pain than ever before.
It's a good point, isn't it? The notion that a person who feels they want to die can make an objective, informed decision about whether to live or die is frankly absurd if you think about it. In reality, they are the least qualified people because they are, yes, so frightened and agonized that they want to die. Any of us have experienced genuine pain of any sort, really, or profound nausea, know that it's difficult to see beyond the immediate need to be free of distress. The answer is not to help someone die, but help someone to live. Nor can elderly and ill people, even when not in pain, really make truly independent decisions. The media tells them that only the young and the sexy really matter. Their families often put them in institutions and then wonder why they feel rejected. And a culture that once revered the aged as temples of wisdom now looks on them as slums of irrelevance. It is no accident that the most intimidated by and active against euthanasia are the disabled. While we boast equality, we violently discriminate against disability at the earliest opportunity by, aborting babies that are considered imperfect. Imagine how a Down syndrome person feels knowing that many desire a future society where Down syndrome people do not exist. I mean, it's worth remembering that when in 1993 Robert Latimer, remember him, killed his little girl Tracy, he claimed he was putting her out of her misery, when of course he was putting her out of his. But even the phrase likens this unique human made in the image of God to an animal. The difference, I suppose, is that pigs, cows, baby seals, chickens now attract celebrity support, whereas children with cerebral palsy, well, they don't. Equally pernicious and more subtle is the idea that euthanasia would be rare and only at the request of the dying person. The handicapped, by the way, are some of the most vociferous opponents of euthanasia.
This morning, not feeling too well. Went to see the doctor to see what he could tell. The doctor checked me over, then he shook his head and said, if I was disabled as you, I know I'd rather be dead. So when they think you're better off dead, but they say it's your right to choose, that's when you start to get the euthanasia blues.
Bit of empathy, please. The truth is that there are myriad cases of abuse of what is already a murderous procedure. In most of the regions where such killing is legal, the boards of inquiry are composed of the very people who introduced the policies in the first place, which explains why there are so few prosecutions in cases of obvious crime. One particularly obnoxious episode I've mentioned this before. It involved a terminally ill but comfortable and well-adjusted woman living in Holland who had visited her doctor in hospital for a routine checkup. He advised her to take advantage of the visit, stay overnight for some well-deserved respite. The food wasn't that bad. When the doctor did his rounds the following morning, the woman, she was dead, given lethal drugs by another medic who had assumed, this being the climate of Dutch healthcare, that the patient was there for termination. Remember that euthanasia ideologues believe that if a depressed teenager or a healthy but troubled young adult wants to die, they should have the right to do so, and that the state has the duty to help them do so. The caricature of the desperate person eager to die and pleading with loved ones to stop the pain and hasten a death that is inevitable anyway, that is not typical. The cult of youth, a medical system struggling for money, elder abuse, contempt for the handicapped, mingle all this together, and the idea of legal euthanasia in Canada is absolutely bloody terrifying.
Life's all about choices. Like, I chose to go to uni and study engineering. And while I was there, I chose to drink and generally have a bloody good time. I chose to marry Tina, have 2 great kids. I chose to always drive a Ford. Chose this shirt. Even chose this haircut. What I didn't choose was being terminally ill. I didn't choose to starve to death because eating is like swallowing razor blades. And I certainly didn't choose to have to watch my family go through it with me. I've made my final choice. I just need the government to listen.
You didn't choose to be Australian either, but that's the cross you have to bear, isn't it, Cobber? I don't think that proves anything at all. Pure emotionalism, and a lot of the arguments in favour of euthanasia are based on rhetoric and emotion and hyperbole. And as I said, this compelling case, this terrible case of a couple who apparently leapt to their deaths. Elisa Globe, Campaign Life Coalition, joins us. It's a terrible case, but it proves nothing at all.
Absolutely not. And I mean, if we look at other states like Oregon, or even in Belgium, 32% of people with disabilities or who are in pain died without request. So this is ultimately
32%.
32%, which is
and they're reliable figures.
Yes, absolutely.
So that would be the family giving consent?
Yes, the family or even the patient, especially with regards to physician-assisted suicide. So
I mean, you said that they didn't give consent. So if the person who's killed doesn't give consent, that means it's either the family or it's a doctor making a decision.
Right.
And either way, I don't want someone else giving their authority that I should be killed. I mean, many would like it, but I don't want that to happen.
Exactly, and you hear of so many elderly couples who are just afraid to go to the hospital because they're afraid of what's going to happen or what the result will be. Yes, it's a very tragic case. You know, the neighbors, like you said, giving interviews saying that it was very tragic, especially a couple of them who actually helped them on a regular basis. But one even said that, you know, when the husband was in the, he would often go down to the lobby, and she would talk to him, and he would say that he was depressed. And like you said in your monologue, you know, when these patients go to the hospital, and they were going frequently for trying to get pain relief, they should be screened for these depression tests. They should be given these caregiver support groups, because ultimately they won't have to think or go to the very end.
That's the point, isn't it? I'm not blaming doctors here because our medical system will have to change. What's happening now is because there's so little funding, there's prioritization. We know, and again, I'm not blaming people for this, but if it's a couple close to death chronologically anyway, that doctor hasn't got the time to really deal with and make sure there's an end-of-life specialist, a pain management expert. They know what they're doing, but they'll never have that allocated, and so they go to her, they're on their own. Some of the people now saying it was so tragic, some helped, not all of them helped, and they feel depressed, and then they talk themselves into there is no point, and it's over. Well, that's no solution to this problem. The solution is to help them.
Absolutely. And these support groups are out there, especially for Alzheimer's patients, but just for caregivers in general, and it can be a very strenuous task. I mean, Marika, the woman, she was in a wheelchair, she had chronic pain, he himself suffered from different pains. So just to have all that burden and to even go out of your house and go on bi-weekly basis to the doctor can be very strenuous. So it ultimately is very tragic, and I don't think that it should be made out to be any type of a compassionate case, or even some people are saying like a tragic love story, like they wanted to die together. I don't think that would definitely deal with the problem at hand.
No, and we don't know the details of what happened even at this stage. But Dr. Lowe, who just about a month ago died, and I knew him, and a fine man, and it was a tragic tragic loss. But he said at one point in the interview, if those people who oppose euthanasia could spend 24 hours in my body, with all due respect to him, and he was a great man, there are people who spend every day in such a body and are outspoken opponents of euthanasia. I don't think just experience can create the argument. There are severe dangers here. It's no accident that the vast majority of doctors oppose this.
Yeah, and I don't think that these patients who, you don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but those who do have chronic pain or those euthanasia proponents who are suffering, what kind of stress they're under and what kind of pressure they're under to actually be vocal proponents of euthanasia because, like you said, a lot of people who do suffer from various disabilities do not want euthanasia. The overwhelming majority. The elderly are scared to go into the hospitals. Like the target groups for the euthanasia.
You mean Belgium and Holland? And
yeah,
yes,
the target groups. They don't want this.
It's certainly true. I mean, there have been surveys that older people and people suffering have anxieties now. It seems, though, cases like this, there are more and more people, young people, who are changing their mind on euthanasia. I think the country is still pretty much divided, but do you think you're going to lose this one the same way the abortion issue and others were lost?
I certainly hope not. I hope that, the respect for life at this level and we have strong enough arguments. And I mean, they haven't won so far, and there's been a strong push for it in Quebec and in different parties. So I hope not. Yeah.
I hope not too. Well, I think there are enough people still speaking out against it. Let's hope.
Yes.
Appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.